Today we'll have our second MARVIC project webinar. Its title is Mitigation Potential of Carbon Farming Practices in Europe. Welcome again and thank you for joining us. My name is Leandro Trup. I will be hosting the first part of this webinar. I work as a communication manager for the MARVIC project, but the webinar itself is organized by Jan-Peter Leesen from Wageningen University and Research, and we'll have Adam Svoboda, Elena Larish, Milagros Torrus, Jens Leifert, and Flora Tesme as speakers. So first, let me tell you a little bit about the MARVIC project in case you're not familiar with it. Our project is an EU-funded project within the Mission Soil that aims to develop a harmonized and context-specific monitoring, reporting, and verification framework for assessing soil carbon stock exchanges and greenhouse gas emissions by agricultural activities. So our goal is to support sustainable farming practices across Europe and to boost faith in EU public and private carbon farming schemes, which we do from several standpoints. So from the technical side, for instance, we aim to identify and improve MRV building blocks, also to design and assemble these MRV systems, test and fine-tune the MRV framework, and also assess the mitigation and socioeconomic potential of carbon farming, which we'll partly share with you today. We do this all while contributing to the CRCF policy development process and also connecting and interacting with the broad carbon farming and MRV stakeholder communities. So the MRV systems covered by MARVIC are related to four land use, agricultural land use and soil types, which you can see here on the bottom left part of the slide, which are arable lands, grasslands, agroforestry and woody crops, and managed peatlands. So you're also welcome to follow this QR code on the bottom right of the slide, where you can find more information about the project, such as some resources like policy briefs and public documents, also project news, and also the other webinars. So the previous one, which we had last year, and future ones that we will schedule in the next months. So also you can see here all the partners that are part of our project, which is coordinated by ILFO. Well, we have 16 partners across Europe. So after this presentation, again, it is my pleasure to introduce Jan-Peter Leesen from Wageningen University and Research. Jan-Peter is a senior researcher and project leader for soil and climate. He has over 10 years of experience on greenhouse gas emissions, soil science, land use, agriculture, and regional scale modeling. Jan-Peter has more than 60 publications, including scientific articles in international journals with peer review and book chapters, and he's also a member of the CRETA project, which is a support group that provides technical assistance to the CRCF expert group on carbon removals, and also on the part of the LULUCF expert group. So in MARVIC, Jan-Peter is a work package leader on the mitigation potential of carbon farming practices under current and future climate change scenarios. So Jan-Peter, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Leandro, for this introduction, and welcome everyone to this webinar. So as Leandro said, I'm work package leader of the work package which is dealing with mitigation potential of carbon farming. Which maybe seems a bit out of the scope of the rest of the project, because the key aspects of MARVIC is really on the monitoring, reporting, verification. But we included this work package as well, as it is important to know a bit. I mean, if you set up a MRV framework, you have to know which are the practices that contribute most, and that will likely be involved in these carbon farming projects. So we need to know something about the mitigation potential. And also, so that's one of the first tasks we had in the project, is really to provide what is the state of the art of the mitigation potentials, building on existing literature and previous and ongoing projects. And that is the work which was done in the first 18 months of this project, and which will be presented today in the first part of the webinar. A second task we have in this work package is dealing with the refined reporting and sink valuation by implementing radiative forcing calculations. Well, it's a difficult title, but what this is about, as we have in carbon farming, we are dealing with mostly temporary removals. It's not permanent like where you capture the CO2 from the air and store it in the geological storage, but it's more vulnerable to reversal. So in this task, we will look at what are the impacts and how can you value these temporary removals. And that will be the second part of this webinar, where Flora will present the work they have done so far on the quantification using the radiative forcing concept. Then we have 3 other tasks that are not really presented in this webinar, but where we will work on in the future. So one task is really to map spatially what is the mitigation potential for each of the practices that we have assessed in Europe, so people can have an idea. If I want to set up a carbon farming project, what are practices that might in my region have a potential? And also for policymakers, this is very useful to know to which to which practices they might support. In the next task, we will evaluate these to validate these in the regions. And then we have a final task, which is also an important one, is really on looking what is the impact of climate change on these mitigation potentials, because we might know these practices might work now, but are they still have potential in the future when there's maybe more drier periods? Is there a risk on release? So this is mainly done with modeling work in this final task. So if we go to the next slide, we see what are the kind of practices that we will be looking at. So as Leandro already said, in the MARVIC project, we have the so-called LUST, so the land use and soil type specific components where we focus on. So in arable land, we are looking to practices on soil carbon sequestration, same for grassland. And then we have the agroforestry and woody crops, where we partly look at the soil part, but also a bit on the biomass part. And finally, we look at peatlands, which is of course a quite different system where it's not about that much on sequestration, but much more on emission reductions. And as the practices are quite different, we will focus in the first presentation. We will, based on the state-of-the-art review, look at these different components. So we will, Adam will present on the mineral soils under arable land and grassland, because that was led by them. That will be followed by, let me think, now I think Elena, who will do the agroforestry, Milagros, the woody crops, and finally Jens will do the peatland section. So I can now give the floor to Adam. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we will discuss them at the end of the first block of the presentations, otherwise not to interrupt too much. So Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Well, hello everyone. My name is Adam Svoboda. I'm from Czech University of Life Sciences. I'm a PhD student focusing on carbon sequestration and energy fluxes in different farming systems. And I would like to present you the first 2 sections of the deliverable. And I would also like to thank my colleagues that were stated right on the few slides before for their cooperation on doing this deliverable. Well, let's jump to our objectives. The objectives were as follows: to develop a database of relevant and suitable carbon farming practices, to provide an appraisal of the potential of these carbon farming practices in increasing carbon sequestration, to identify the technical and biophysical factors that constrain the theoretical mitigation potential, and to detect the main gaps in knowledge on evaluating the actual effectiveness. Let's move to our methodology. We conducted a systematic literature search using scientific databases based on the meta reviews. We used 2-round selection system in which we used selected criteria to categorize the studies. One of the criteria, for example, for arable lands was that the studies had to relate to Europe or European Union. But for example, for grasslands, we couldn't keep the same, mostly because lack of the studies, and also the studies, the meta reviews and other studies had to allow direct comparison of the results. You can see also how extensive the research was. We reviewed total 84 studies. For the data set of arable lands, we selected 14 peer-reviewed studies, a meta-analysis covering 5 key practices. It was catch and cover crops, crop rotations, reduced tillage, zero tillage, and organic amendment and crop residue amendments. And for the data set of grassland, we selected 12 studies covering 4 key practices. It was maintenance of permanent grassland, it was optimizing manure application, optimizing grazing intensity, and converting from arable, from cropland to grassland. We can move next. Thank you. Here you can see like the overall results of both sections. The arable land, that's the blue one, and grassland, that's the green one. These diagrams, as you can see, show quite a bit of variability that is leading us to some kind of uncertainties, but we have collected data that, based on that, we are able to quantify the potential. I will go through the most of the practices step by step. Thank you. Starting with the catch crops and cover crops. As you can see, the sequestration potential of catch crops and cover crops is set around 0.24 tons of carbon per hectare. But we have to also know that the studies that we used were conducted at the depth didn't exceed 30 centimeters in the soil, so we have to take this into account. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. Crop rotations, the median of the carbon sequestration of crop rotations is set around 0.17 tons of carbon per hectare, again at 30 centimeters of the soil maximum. Reduced tillage, the median of reduced tillage is set around 0.23 tons of carbon per hectare per year. And again, the studies that the sampling were conducted didn't exceed, the soil didn't exceed 30 centimeters. Zero tillage showed considerable results of carbon sequestration potential. We can see that the median is 0.4 tons of carbon per hectare per year. However, these results are influenced by the soil depth. While increase in carbon can be observed in the first 25-30 centimeters, other studies suggest that when we consider whole soil profile, the carbon increase is not significantly different from zero. And the last practice from arable lands, that is organic amendments and crop residue management. The median of carbon sequestration potential of this practice is set at 0.17 with the maximum depth 30 centimeters. Now let's move to the grassland section. As I already said, we studied 4 practices. It was maintenance of permanent grassland and pastures. It was optimizing manure application, optimizing grazing intensity, and conversion from arable land to grassland. For example, optimizing manure application, the median of carbon sequestration potential of this practice is set around 0.6 at 20 centimeters depth. And we can move to another section. The conversion of arable land to grassland showed also very promising results. You can see that the median is set around 1 ton of carbon per hectare. But we also have to note that annual potential in this case follows a saturation curve. So there is a gradual decline in the annual sequestration carbon of the carbon over time. So that's what we have also to know. We were not able to quantify the drivers because we were also looking at drivers affecting variability and co-benefits, and we were not able to quantify the drivers, but we identified them qualitatively based on the meta-analysis and other studies. So, for example, regarding catch crops, the drivers are like the type of catch and cover crop, the climate and weather conditions, agricultural practices used, soil fertility and health, and geographical and local factors. Although it was not our main goal, we also qualitatively identified some co-benefits and trade-offs. So, for example, one of the co-benefits are like that catch and cover crops prevent soil erosion, they are reducing runoff, improving soil structure, and thus they're increasing infiltration, and they are trapping nutrients and reducing nitrate leaching. To sum this up, the results reflect the methodology that is based on meta reviews. It is crucial to recognize that the carbon farming involves a combination of multiple practices, not just the only one, and therefore we shouldn't overvalue the results. While zero tillage showed considerable potential for the sequestration, the wide range, of course, introduces uncertainty. And as I already said, there are studies pointing out that the increase of carbon can be seen in the topsoil. And when we consider whole soil profile, the increase is not significantly different from zero. And another study that not study but practice that showed considerable potential is conversion from arable land to grassland. I already said that there is a saturation curve, and the practice should not be spatially limited to zones, should be spatially limited to zones which are prone to erosion, to avoid the indirect land use change. So, thank you very much for your attention.
So now the next land use and soil type is agroforestry. In general, just a short introduction of myself. My name is Elena Larisch. I'm a postdoc at the Chair of Forest Growth and Dendroecology at the University of Freiburg. And I have expertise in, of course, dendroecological fields, but also in agroforestry with a focus on tree growth and carbon sequestration in trees. When it comes to agroforestry, I think it's just important to briefly sketch what it is. So agroforestry systems are multifunctional land use practices that integrate woody perennials like trees or shrubs with agricultural activities. So stay here, sorry. Integrating trees can bear multiple benefits to the soil, such as the organic matter contribution. So trees in agroforestry systems can contribute to organic matter through leaf litter, root turnover, other biomass inputs such as fruits, which then decompose and increase the soil organic carbon levels. Then the second point is the tree rooting. The deep rooting systems of trees in agroforestry, they can enhance the carbon storage by stabilizing the soil structure and by promoting the carbon accumulation in various soil depths. And the last one is the soil health. So the trees improve the microclimate through, for example, wind speed reduction, and they improve the soil health through, for example, hydraulic lift during dry periods or heat spells, which can lead to increased microbial activity and thus further enhance the SOC levels. Thank you. It's fine. The keywords in this review, they included the terms, of course, agroforestry, also AFS, agroforestry systems, in combination with soil carbon sequestration, carbon mitigation, soil carbon stock, and carbon mitigation potential. Overall, we included 18 peer-reviewed articles, where 12 have been empirical studies and 6 have been global meta-analysis. So we got an overall of 348 experimental studies with a temporal range between 2006 and 22. So when it now comes to the different systems of agroforestry, usually it is divided based on the agricultural component. So the first division is made when we have the silvopastoral agroforestry systems, where we have the grazing and the livestock combined with trees. And the second one is the silvoarable agroforestry systems, where we have trees or hedges either surrounding the agricultural fields, or it's scattered, or it's available as alley cropping, like where we have trees in rows aligned within the area. And when we now have a look at the results of the review, we see that the soil carbon sequestration rate for silvopastoral systems is much lower. It's roughly about 0.1 ton carbon per hectare and year. And for the silvoarable systems, it's between 0.4 and 0.5 on average. So it's higher. Then we come to the next point, what we should address, and especially in regards to trees and the rooting systems, we should look at different soil layers, how this is being affected by trees there. And of course, we can see that if we stick to the topsoil, we have, compared to deeper soil layers, the most or the highest soil carbon sequestration rates. And then it's a bit decreasing, but important to notice that we still have also in deeper soil layers still an amount of soil carbon being sequestered. And however, what should be really noticed already here, that there's no common protocol how experimental studies should be done. So the upper bars you see here, there we have a bigger integration of soil depths from 0 to 50 to 0 to 2 meters. And there the bigger levels are just based on the fact that the cylindrical volume is increasing, and therefore it's more soil carbon stored in this more volume. Also interesting is the fact that if we look at silvoarable agroforestry systems, that we have a difference between hedgerows and alley cropping, so between shrubs and trees. Here we have, for the hedgerows, a much higher soil carbon sequestration rate than for the alley cropping. When we now come to the key insights, I think it's important to mention that in general, agroforestry systems have a positive potential. So if you place trees into farmland, it will increase the long-term carbon storage. If we have a look at the silvoarable, which is having in general better potential than silvopastoral systems, and alley croppings give robust results, but hedgerows show a bit of a greater potential. However, there are not many studies yet, so they need to be a bit more studied here. When it comes to different stakeholders, the scientific perspective is a bit challenging. Like, we have complex land use systems which require complex analysis. So oftentimes, because there's like a lot of things influencing the SOC rate, such as the soil type, the climate, the tree and the crop species, the tree density on the area, also the system age, so the tree age, and if there's tillage or not. All these factors are greatly influencing the SOC rate. So oftentimes we are a bit stuck in the it depends scenario. For the farmers, it is crucial to know that there will be financial benefits, but not really at the beginning. So what you see here, this graph is showing the above ground carbon for one tree. On the y-axis, and on the x-axis you have the diameter at breast height, so the thickness of the stem at breast height. And yeah, roughly when you are from 0 to 20 centimeters, it can depend on the species. Apple trees need, for example, 25 years. Oak trees need a lot longer to grow to this thickness. So there we see already that if we want to get to the exponential gains, it needs to have a longer time span than the usual certification rounds. So in any way, the crop yield reductions must be offset for the farmer, but we should also not forget that the crop benefits from the co-benefits of trees standing on the site. For the policymakers, it's important to state that we have an increased land use efficiency, so we have more food and biomass per unit area. However, we must be still critical, and even if this is clearly wanted, right now there will be no parameter, no linearly usable number like 0.7 ton per hectare per year. This is not working like this for agroforestry systems. Now, my last slide is dealing with the co-benefits, which are really a lot when it comes to agroforestry systems. I already stated it in the beginning. So we have great benefits for soil health and fertility. There is, roots stabilize the soil structure. We have root decay, leaf litter, everything contributes to the nutrient cycle. And also wind and water erosion of the soil is reduced when trees stand on site. Also, the water management, the increased organic matter improves the soil ability to retain water, and the tree roots reduce the runoff, especially on sloped areas. When it comes to the biodiversity management, biodiversity is enhanced by trees because trees are usually providing habitats for a wide range of species. So, and this can lead then to like an increase in the microbial and invertebrate diversity in the soil. Also, we have an air quality improvement due to the trees because trees act usually as natural filters for dust and particulates. This is also really a concern in areas which are prone to wind erosion, or maybe also urban areas where the air quality management is a bigger concern. And what I was telling on the last slide before, the increased land use efficiency. So we have food and biomass grown on the same area. So as we see, there are a lot of like co-benefits alongside the positive carbon mitigation potential of agroforestry soils. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Then we now continue to the woody crops, and where Milagros and the team of CSIC did most of the work. So please, Milagros, although you're appearing as Ana Gonzalez or Ana Sanchez, I think, but go ahead.
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, fine.
Okay, perfect. I'm Milagros. I did my doctoral thesis at the University of Jaén on carbon balance and carbon footprint on olive growth on the different management practices. And I'm currently working at the FSC in Córdoba. And I'm going to explain some of the results obtained for woody growths. The most worldwide reporting management practices that influence in the store of carbon in the soil in woody growth system are spontaneous cover crops, reduced tillage, the application of organic advancement, organic fertilizers, pruning herbicides, and grazing. And due to the wide variety of management practices, only 4 of them were considered to provide general answer. cover crops, organic advancement, organic fertilizers, no tillage and tillage. The last ones was used as reference. The next one, please. Okay. Sorry, the next one. Okay. Here, some result about carbon accumulated in apochrome and velochrome biomass. Within the olive groves, only 4 of the 48 selected papers contain information related to the apochrome and velochrome biomass or carbon balance. 15 in the case of the vineyards, 4 in the fruit orchards, and 2 in almond trees. Taking into account the great number of articles corresponding to vineyards, the following analysis were carried out. In the first graph, the result was the organic carbon content in the cover crops biomass was higher than in the rest of the vineyards components, followed by the leaves and branches, where the trend was the one with the lowest carbon content. In the case of the second graph, the carbon content in 10 and 15 years old plantation was higher than in the 20 and 35 years old plantation, while this carbon content was lower in the younger plantation with 5 years old. The next one. In relation to carbon stock according to management practices, we can see that the carbon stock did not show significant difference depending on the management practices carried out, cover crops, manure, organic fertilizers, no tillage and tillage, covering all sample beds. However, in olive groves, the type of management practices led to significant in the previous slide. Yeah. However, in olive groves, the type of management practices led to significant in carbon stock. These differences were found between cover crops and organic manure, organic fertilizers and no tillage. An important thing is that the number of studied and data considered in the analysis was lower for fruit trees and annual trees as compared to olive groves and vineyards. We have a higher number. However, however, the number of articles was much lower when the data was filtered for the manure and organic fertilizers, and in fact, no articles were found for fruit trees and almond trees in relation to manure or organic fertilizers. It's important to know that the number of particles is reduced when the sample depth is for 0 to 5 centimeters, while there are a larger number of particles that present data for 0 to 30 centimeters soil depth. Okay, the next one. For all wood grows, the carbon stock was lower when the management practices was not used, but does not refer exclusively to bare soil. And the highest was observed for cover crops in the case of almond trees and tillage for fruit trees and vineyards. Despite the not significant difference, the carbon stock in the soil is higher on the manure, followed by tillage and covered crops, while no tillage is the management practices that present the lowest carbon stock in the soil. The next, please. Okay, here if we analyze all the possible combination of management practices carried out for the different sample depths, we can see that for each body cross, the soil carbon stock will vary depending on the practice carried out. In the case of the olive groves, the combination of tillage and no-cover crops and perennial retides presented the highest value of carbon stock in the soil. However, it cannot consider representative since the value is 106 tons of carbon per hectare, corresponding to only one article from a sample depth of 0 to 100 centimeters. Therefore, it's more representative to consider the combination of no-tillage and plenary sided and cover crops as the practice that implies the greatest carbon content carbon stock in the soil, that it represents 60 tons of carbon per hectare. The lowest levels were obtained when the management practices were no-tillage and plenary sided and no cover crops. In the case of vinaigers, we can see that removing covered crops but moving and applying brunette residues was the combination with the highest carbon stock in the soil, because it still represented 24 tons of carbon per hectare, compared to when brunette residues were not applied in the soil, because it represented 50 tons of carbon per hectare. The highest value of carbon stock in the soil was the combination of no-tillage and brunette residues and covered crops, averaging 38 tons of carbon per hectare for the set of body crops analyzed, vinaigers and olive crops. The lowest values were obtained with the combination of no-tillage and brunette residues and no-covered crops that averaged 8.95 tons of carbon per hectare for the set of body crops studied. Considering all the possible combination of management practices for each of the body crops, the result was that the olive crops would have a higher reported carbon stock in the soil as compared to vinaigers. The next one. Okay. Finally, with overview on body crops, we could see that it will be necessary to put more effort into the following points that I indicate if we want to establish clear guidelines on good practices in experimental study on soil carbon, organic carbon. For example, you can see that it's very important to taking into account the coarse fragment content and the bulk density. In many of the articles, the information provided was ambiguous. More detailed information is needed on the management practices that are carried out. For example, the years they have been implemented, and information on the age or planting, among others. The problem is that most of the article focus on the 30 centimeter of soil, but it will be necessary to explore more the soil profile and roots, for example, 1 meter of depth. And on the other hand, most study take sample between roots. But what happened under the canopy? It's very important to consider that question. To finish with the part about body crops, some of the main conclusions are those you can see. And the first one is that carbon sequestration is higher when no-tillage is combined with the use of brunette residues and the implementation of covered crops. The second one is that all crops demonstrate that the highest soil organic carbon levels due to the longevity and diverse management practices. And the third, it will be that the lowest level of soil organic carbon were obtained when covered crops was not implemented and herbicide were used or with buried soil management. Okay, this is all from me. And if you have any question, don't hesitate to let. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Milagros. Well, before we go to the questions, we go to the last presentation of this slot, which is about the peatlands. So I give the floor to Jens Leifeld. He's working at Agroscope in Switzerland. Go ahead, Jens.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thanks for introducing. So I'm sharing myself, is it correct?
Yes, you can.
All right. Do you see everything?
Not full screen yet, but yeah, no, it's fine.
Okay, thanks. I'm leading the Climate and Agriculture Group at Agroscope in Switzerland, and we were working on the peatland revetting topic in MARVIC. So I will say something about the status of the emissions from drained peatlands in Europe. I will give you an insight into the literature review that we did on the emission factors from drained and revetted peatlands and give some conclusions. So overall, from the global peatland assessment from 22, we know that Europe particularly has a very large share of drained peatlands, almost 50%. And this share can be even much higher in some countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, or Switzerland, where it might be 80 or 90%. And this drainage induces very high CO2 emissions. Overall, the emissions are at the moment estimated to be between 120 and maybe 300 megatons CO2 equivalents per year, which is close to the EU's target for carbon removals of 310. So the peatlands, they have a high potential if we could reduce those emissions. And naturally, those peatlands are greenhouse gas sinks. So in the next 5 slides, I will show you almost the same thing based on the reviews from different countries. So you always see the mean water table depths at the x-axis and the NEP at the y-axis. NEP here is defined as net ecosystem productivity, which is the CO2 balance at the field scale, and the harvest export, which is accounted for as CO2 loss in the calculations. These are data from Germany, from Thiemeyer, showing the general pattern that we have a negative relationship between the water table depth and the NEP, but a large scatter. These are data from the UK, from Chris Evans, where we have the same negative relationship, but more a linear dependency of NEP on the water table. For Denmark, we also have a very nice data set published by Koch and colleagues, where we have almost the same pattern as we have for Germany. Then there is also recent publication from the Netherlands, Aben and co-authors. These are the gray triangles. They have the same negative relationship, but overall there the emissions are below the ones that we have for the other data from particularly Denmark and Germany. We in general have a very high scatter, which is mostly related to the fact that we have many different sites included in those studies. If you look at the individual site scale, these are now data from one of our sites in Switzerland, we find the same relationship, but of course there's a smaller scatter. And this is a study where we had by chance 4 consecutive years of eddy measurements, but with very different water table depths. And finally, now revetting. This is a data compilation by Bianchi and colleagues. Revetting leads to almost 0 emissions in terms of CO2 at water tables of between minus 20 centimeters and the surface. The best fit through this data is a sigmoidal curve, and this has also been shown for the data from Denmark and Germany. But you can also see that the unexplained variance in this data set is huge, particularly in the region where the curve goes down to the 0 line. Now let's have a look a bit more into C2 ovals. These are the Dutch data. From grasslands, where they represent 2 different types. The gray one is regular managed grassland, and the light blue ones are one so-called subsurface water infiltration. So there the water table is artificially raised slightly, as you can see. So the oval represents the 95% interval of both the water table and the NEP. And you can see that even with a slight change in water table, on average, the carbon emission situation improves. On the right side of the graph, you see the disaggregation of the Bianchi data into peatland rehabilitation, which is no management after revetting, and 2 other ovals. The blue one is paludiculture with harvest removal, and the yellow one is sphagnum farming, which is also paludiculture without harvests included. And this data indicate that's depending on how we deal with the harvest, or whether we export carbon from the system or not, the overall effect on NEP may change, although we have to say that also in this case, the vegetation and the underlying peat types are also different. What's about methane? So methane is usually exponentially increasing when we raise the water table. This is a pattern that we see in all studies that analyzed also methane alongside with CO2. And if you take those both gases together and use a simplified global warming potential 100 calculation, we can find an optimum of the water table in terms of emission reduction, which is around minus 15 to close to the surface. There's also N2O, of course. For N2O, the water table depth, the mean annual one, is not a good predictor, or not a predictor at all suitable for estimating the N2O, unlike for CO2 and methane. This is a review also from European sites that was published in 22. However, in the very same study, the authors also classified the data along natural drained and revetted peatlands, and this clearly shows that with revetting, we reduce the N2O fluxes in those peatlands to close to zero, whereas for the drain situation, the N2O emissions can be very, very high. And the reason for this is that unlike in mineral soils and for also carbon sequestration, this is important. The N2O mostly doesn't derive from the fertilization, but as is shown on the right side here from a study that we did last year, most of the nitrogen release comes from the peat decomposition, and this is then partly converted to N2O. And this also has implications for mitigation measures for N2O when it comes to the managed peatlands. So this is an emission reduction with revetting. What is the overall climate effect? Can we achieve a climate positive situation? So a net greenhouse gas cooling effect over the long run. We can, yes, but this takes a while. So this is based on the radiative forcing of peatlands, and Flora Desmet will later introduce this concept in more detail. So when we look at the deeply drained peatland, which is minus 60 centimeters, which is the uppermost dashed line, we have a cumulative forcing which is quite substantial. So there's a warming, of course. This is reduced when we raise the water table. And when we go with the water table to an optimum within this calculation is around minus 5 centimeters, we will have a net cooling of the whole system despite the continued methane emissions, but only after around 400 years. So the take home here is that we have a fast improvement relative to the baseline situation when we revet, but the net cooling is only achieved after centuries, and net cooling also requires the buildup of carbon. So we need to sequester carbon in the system to overcompensate for the continuous methane emissions. And now the question, I'll come to my second last slide, is when we have paludiculture, so we revet and then we manage the land and we also harvest. What is the effect of this harvest export of carbon on the overall greenhouse gas and carbon balance of the field? This is a very important question, and this is not so much addressed yet in the literature. I will give you one example. This is a very recent study from Denmark, where they studied for the same site for paludiculture with phalaris, the greenhouse gas balance for either no harvest or for harvest with 2 or 5 cuts and fertilization. In this different treatments, we have the same greenhouse gas balance, although we have a substantial harvest export of between 4.2 and 4.7 tons carbon per hectare and year. And the resulting carbon balance roughly is also similar. So in this example, the harvest export has little effect on the NEP of the system, and we need more data like this to better estimate what the net effect of paludiculture will be. So together, if we were able to revet all the drained peatlands in Europe, we would save most of their current greenhouse gas emissions. This is a common pattern in all studies. And we may note that currently the revetted area is only about 1%, so there's quite a lot of room for improvement. The emission factors and the trade-offs between the CO2 and the methane are site-specific. We saw a huge scatter, but at the site scale, the scatter is much smaller. So we need to have more site-specific data. We can achieve a net cooling beyond just improving the emission situation relative to a business as usual, but this requires a buildup of carbon in the ecosystem, so the formation of peat. And from the review, we find that we have some research needs. So one is to go now more towards site or ecosystem type specific response curves, and or to include more specific predictors and not just the mean annual water table, which is a great predictor, but of course it's not able to explain substantial parts of the variability. And second, we need to evaluate better the effect of harvest removal on the carbon balance in paludicultures. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jens.
Sorry, I forgot to show the last slide, which says thank you, and then the next step.
Yeah. So now we have had the first block of presentations all about the state of the art of the mitigation potentials. This work has all been collected in the first deliverable of this work package, and it has been reviewed recently. So we hope that we can provide this deliverable soon at the MARVIC website. So you can see also the details on this. Yeah, one conclusion I think is, well, you could see it is quite variable. There's quite some high variability on where what is the impact and the mitigation potential, and I think this is important to know. And I thought also in the chat already, it's quite site specific. You have to take account of the soil conditions. So hopefully we can also, when we create those European-wide maps, take that better into account and make it a bit more specific. So that is, this work is really a nice basis to continue from. So now we have like up to 10 minutes, I think, for questions. So a few in the chat, but I think a few were already answered or discussed. But I see one from Chloe. If you want, you can ask also yourself.
Hi, hello.
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
I think Anna already replied. It was just for curiosity to have the yield or the production for example, if I take olive trees according to management practices, because if we are looking to convince the producers to change their practices, the yield is quite important aspect. So that they have the full picture of, that's why I was asking if we have this information, but Anna replied already.
Yeah, okay, I see in that. Yeah. Then I see a question also for Milagros from Gary. Gary, can you?
It was just, Milagros, you showed a lot of very interesting data, but some of it was very confusing. Some of the red areas showing the lowest carbon content was actually from the no-till soils. So I found it very difficult coming to an overall conclusion for permanent crops about this big argument about whether no-tillage really helps. So what's your conclusion about that? And what's your conclusion about the difference that it makes if you take a deeper sample and compare till versus no-till?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I said that the principal conclusion is that the carbon sequestration is higher when no-tillage is combined with the use of recycled and cover crops. Because, for example, in olive crops, when you don't make any type of tillage and you use a cover crops, you implemented the cover crops, the levels is higher in comparison with your tillage. Why? Because you produce a reduce of organic carbon, because it's produced the mineralization of the carbon, and it's produced emission of dioxide carbon. But I don't know if this is the question or not.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the reduced no-tillage discussion is also like for the woody crops, the same for arable land. I think it was, I don't know, Claire, if you would like to discuss this further. You had a question on this as well.
Yes, and yes, I had a question on the data that has been used. So the answer I had is that essentially reviews have been used, not primary studies, and I understand given the amount of work, but some of the reviews are, for me, I consider not relying on proper primary data, especially because it's not the same, often in paired comparisons, the two pairs are not really equal, that there are different, it's not only tillage that varies. There's also issues in some of these, the literature used in these syntheses on the bulk density data. So I'm not confident on, well, some of the numbers proposed by these reviews, which were some, you know, are pretty date from the 2008 and so. So at the time, it was the material that was available. But since then, there has been quite a lot of meta-analysis. And yeah.
Yeah, I think this is really a sensitive point, and I think, well, if we now for the methodology development under the CRCF, we also included that reduced zero tillage should be at least combined with other carbon farming practices, because it might be often that just the tillage itself is probably not, but in combination with.
Yes, it's the inputs, increasing the inputs. That changes, and reducing the erosion also.
Yeah, and for erosion.
It really matters. And maybe, yes, for woody crops, that's also a question of the accounting for carbon loss by erosion. But just, it depends on how the numbers are being used. If it's to give orders of magnitude, no problem. If it's that the numbers will be used as numbers, really to predict carbon storage potentials, then yes, I would be prudent in the way they are just disseminated.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think we should be in that way see this as what are the ranges and the variability, and not directly as the number to be used. I don't know if Adam or Jana would to comment on this further. Or...
Yeah, maybe I would jump in. I collaborated with Adam on this task. So yes, Claire, you have very valid point. And indeed, we used also the earlier data, but it was not the focus. We actually set the time frame for the literature review, I guess, from 2004 to present, and we used all the current studies. So it's not that we would somehow prioritize the earlier studies. There was quite a spread of data, but we have to be careful. I realize what you are saying, and certainly, it's a sensitive point.
Okay, thank you. And yes, one question that I was about to send by the chat, so let me say it orally. The Carbosec project did propose additional carbon storage potentials for different management options based on the meta-analysis of results of European long-term experiments. So the idea was that you were going to use this, but apparently you did not.
Yeah, maybe I can answer that one. So the idea was indeed when we wrote this proposal to really build on Carbosec, but as you know, also results were a bit delayed, and it's a bit because many of the Carbosec results, although the project has finalized, are still with the aim to be published in journals, so they are still under how do you
yes, it's not under embargo. They're not available.
Embargo.
Yes.
That's the word.
Well, they are available because they are members in your team. But
so we know of the results, but we could not one-to-one make use of it because as it is still under embargo, and some of the partners are in MARVIC and some not. But for sure, for the following work in MARVIC, we will build on that as well.
Thank you.
I don't know if anyone has an other question, wants to raise a comment, or I see Hajuk. Please, you can ask it directly.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm Stanislav Hajduk from Mother University in Czech Republic. I'd like to ask you, we have some experiences in our trials that when we use cover crops, especially the catch crops in sown quite late in summer, we measure decline in the soil organic carbon sometimes after the incorporation to the soil. So we think that it can be done by priming effect, that the young biomass start to decomposing of organic matter. So the result is not increasing organic matter, but the opposite. So do you have some experiences with it?
Adam, Jana, you want to comment on this?
I guess I will certainly give the floor to Adam because he read all the literature in detail. But to my knowledge, we are not aware that there would be a bulk of scientific evidence to this effect. I guess it's possible, but as we said, we couldn't actually, due to some practical limitations, review empirical studies from all corners of Europe. That's why we relied on the meta-analysis, and the meta-analysis didn't go to this sort of detail that you are describing, Stanislav. Adam, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible, but the literature that we went through did not point out that there are some decreases, even though there could be, and I think I've already seen one study saying this, but again, it was an empirical study, and we did not included this one into our review, into the analysis.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, anyone who has a last question? Otherwise, we will continue to the second part of the webinar. No questions, then I think Flora, I give the floor to you. So Flora is a postdoc at Agroscope, working with Jens, and she is working on this radiative forcing part and the climate impact of the non-permanence of carbon farming practices.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So thanks, Jan Peter, for the introduction. Yes. So yeah, in this presentation, I'll build on the mitigation potentials that were presented by the other speakers and focus on how the non-permanence of the sequestration would impact this mitigation potential. So for this purpose, I need to move from some mitigation potential rates, so that we had in those different plots, to time-dependent scenarios of the soil organic carbon stock dynamics. So what we get from the previous literature review is a mitigation potential rate over valid over a certain period. So here in this presentation, I assume that they are valid for 20 years, which is duration in the range of the duration of the long-term experiments that are used to derive those rates, and also is in line with the IPCC for the duration that the emission factors are valid for. So after those 20 years, then we get a certain mitigation potential, which I call M20 in this presentation. Of course, this increase, as Elena pointed out earlier, for the agroforestry would not be linear like this, but it could have different shape. So here it's an example for crop residues left on the field. This is from my model experiment, but as Elena said, it could also be more an exponential increase for agroforestry, for instance. And then the question is what can happen after those 20 years. So one possibility would be that the practice is then continued, but we reach a new steady state. So the soil organic carbon is not increasing anymore further. Another option would be that this steady state is not yet reached. So we still have an increase, although it might slow down because of going to this new equilibrium in the system. And a third option would be that if the practice is stopped, for instance, we end up with a progressive back release of the carbon that was sequestered until then. And this would be a case where the sequestration is not permanent. And as also Jan Peter already said, this sequestration is indeed quite dynamic. It's not a geological storage. And that's why we want to study this impact of non-permanence on the climate effects. So for simplicity in this presentation, I will just focus on those two green and red scenarios. So one where we assume that the storage is permanent, and one where we assume that we have some progressive re-release of the sequestered carbon. And what is important to note is that after the 20 years of the, let's say, first period of activity, we have the same amount of carbon that is sequestered in the soil, but the two scenarios won't lead to the same climate impacts. So this is what we will look at now. And to look at this climate impact, I will use a variable called radiative forcing that Jens mentioned already for the peatland presentation. So I will quickly explain what it is or what it means. in a stable climate, which is in balance, then we have the same amount of energy that comes into the Earth system and goes out. And when we have imbalance, as we have, for instance, today, we have less energy that goes out. Today, it is mainly due to the increasing concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are trapping the energy and prevent it to escape as much as it should. And this difference in the radiative flux at the top of our atmosphere is actually what is called radiative forcing. So you see the full definition here, that it's the change in the net radiative flux at the top of the atmosphere. And this radiative forcing is actually a good proxy for the change in global mean temperature. So it's a good proxy to look at climate impacts. And if the change in this net radiative flux is persistent over time, then it will lead to an excess energy accumulation in the system. This is what you see in the red circles here that will be spread among the different components of the Earth system. This excess of energy, we can call it the cumulative radiative forcing, and we will also look at that later in the presentation. So for calculating radiative forcing, we use simple climate models, and I won't go into details here, but if you have questions, you can ask them after the presentation. So just to give an example of this radiative forcing and how does it look like for just a one-time emission of CO2. So this is what you see on this plot here. Everything that will be above zero would lead to a warming, and the radiative forcing below zero lead to a cooling. So in the case of this emission, we have a warming effect, which is quite strong in the first decades, and then is not as strong anymore, but still above zero. And that's why we say that the CO2 emission has a very long-term warming effect. So if we look at the area under the curve, this is the energy that accumulates over time. And this is then the cumulative radiative forcing that you can see on the right plot here. And I will use those two pictograms, so radiative forcing more as a snapshot in time, and cumulative radiative forcing that takes into account the history from time zero to a certain time. If we would have a permanent sequestration, just a pulse sequestration, we would get more or less the reverse, but opposite effects with the cooling effects. So now we are interested in this presentation in the climate impact of non-permanence in the context of carbon farming practices. So we will take again our two scenarios, and we will look at what it means for the radiative forcing for the different practices. So here this M20 has a small p because it will depend on the different carbon sequestration rates for each practice that were given in earlier presentations. And we have also additional assumptions for this study that we right now consider only CO2 emissions. So we don't account, for instance, for changes in N2O emissions. And we also assume that in our baseline condition, the soil is not losing carbon, which means that this sequestration or mitigation potential actually lead to some sequestration. So let's look at the results for the permanent case. This is how the radiative forcing will look for all the different practices that were mentioned in the earlier presentation and using the same rates, so the median rates here. What we can notice here is that we have a durable mitigation because from 0 to 1,000 years, we are still in this blue area. So compared to a baseline situation, we will have a durable cooling. And if we want to equate this climate impact to the one of a certain number of avoided emissions for each hectare where the practice is carried on, we'll get these numbers for each practices again with the ranges here, 25th and 75th percentiles. And what you cannot see on this plot, but is important to note, we will see later, is that this number of equivalent avoided emissions is constant over time because of the permanence and is equal in that case to the mitigation potential after 20 years, which is expected. But now if we look at the non-permanent scenario, we will see the picture looks quite different. This is the radiative forcing that this scenario will lead to. Here we can see that it's quite different from the permanent scenario because the mitigation it doesn't last very long, or it doesn't last further in time than after all the carbon has been sequestered, and after all the carbon has been re-released, and after all the carbon has been re-released, we see that it even go back to a small warming effect compared to baseline, and before it then end up with null effects on the climate. And what is important here is also that because the radiative forcing is a good proxy for the global mean temperature, the global mean temperature change will actually look similar to this with some delay because of different processes that with the ocean taking up some heat and so on, but it will be very similar. So this is relevant when it comes to, for instance, temperature targets, because it means that if we have a temporary sequestration, it might be relevant only if we keep some of the carbon sequestered until we have this peak warming on our global mean temperatures, and if not, it won't act on it. So if we do the same analysis as for the permanent scenario in terms of equivalent amount of avoided emissions at a certain year, so here we look at the year 25, the year 100, and the year 500. So you see with the dotted lines, the number that will be for the permanent scenarios, the number we saw before, and this is constant for every year that we are looking at here. While for this non-permanent scenario, we see that it varies a lot depending on the time we are looking at. So if we look at the year 25, this number of avoided emission is already a little bit lower than the permanent scenario, but it's still quite a good mitigation potential. But if we look at the year 100 or 500, it is even equivalent to a slight emission or just to no effects. So this was from an instantaneous point of view, but we also saw that we can look at the cumulative radiative forcing, which is important for everything that is related with some components of inertia in the Earth system, such as sea level rise, for instance, and it's actually this cumulative radiative forcing that is at the basis of the global warming potentials that are used to convert the effect of different greenhouse gases into CO2 equivalents. So it is very widely used, and we will use this now to compare permanent versus non-permanent scenario directly. So on this plot, you see both the lines for the permanent scenarios, the solid lines, and the lines for the non-permanent, so the dashed dotted. And what we see for this cumulative radiative forcing is that for all scenarios, it stays negative over time, which means that in any case, we have a reduction of this excess energy that accumulates over time, which is good. But we also see that the climate benefit, if we define it as this reduction in excess energy that accumulates in the Earth system, diverges very strongly over time between a situation where we permanently store the carbon and a situation where we don't. So if we look at a percentage of non-permanence versus permanent for different time horizons, so time until which we are looking at the impact, we don't look at impact beyond that time, we end up with this pie chart here where the full circle will be the benefit of 100%, that would be the benefit for the permanent situation, and then in red, the benefit for the non-permanent situation, which is almost 100% if we look for the first 25 years, but decreases very rapidly and strongly if we go and look to longer term impacts. So these numbers, they are actually independent from the different rates of sequestration that were given for the different practices, but they will depend on the time dependency of the soil organic carbon dynamics. So if we have a slower or faster back release, or if we have a longer or shorter buildup, and so on. So this was for arable and grassland and agroforestry. And now this slide will just show you what is the impact of non-permanence in the case of peatland rewetting, which, as we saw from Jens, is a bit different because it's very important there to take into account the methane emissions, so this trade-off between CO2 and methane emissions. So if we look at this plot from a paper from Leifeld from this year, we see the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere in ton CO2 equivalent versus the years of successful rewetting. So in red, you see the baseline, which is the drained situation where we have constant CO2 emissions because the peat is decomposed. And the dark blue line would be a successful rewetting for 100 years. Where we have less emissions, but we still have some positive increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere because of the methane. And everything in between, all the gray lines in between, are some partially successful rewetting. So it could be rewetted for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and so on. And what we see is that compared to the maximum emission savings that we can achieve by a successful rewetting for 100 years, this saving is reduced depending on the number of years of the successful rewetting. So having this successful rewetting that is not permanent would, in a way, just delay the emissions from the peat. Yes, so now I just come to my conclusion slide. So I just want to repeat that, as Jan Peter said, the soil carbon sequestration has a time dependency and is also reversible, which is important to keep it in mind. And however, that being said, if we have a non-permanent carbon sequestration, it is still beneficial for climate mitigation because it cools global mean surface temperature. We have a negative radiative forcing from that, as long as some of the carbon is still sequestered. So it helps us to, in a way, buy time for climate change mitigation, and also can contribute to lower the peak warming if the sequestration is maintained until then. And overall, it also reduces the excess energy that accumulates over time in the system. So for those two reasons, it's for sure already beneficial, as well as for all the co-benefits that were mentioned earlier. However, it's important to keep in mind in terms of climate change mitigation that the effective mitigation will match the given potential rates only if the carbon is permanently sequestered in the soil, and if not, then we indeed sequester the same amount after the activity period, but we end up with substantially less mitigation achieved over time. And this means that the non-permanent carbon sequestration does not offset the warming of a fossil CO2 emission in the long term. So this can be a problem if we want to use that for compensation purposes, for instance, and this is important to have in mind. Yes, so with this, I thank you for your attention, and yeah, I think I will also take some questions.
Thank you, Flora, for explaining very well. I think this quite complex topic, but at least for me it was very clear. And I think it also makes clear that for the development of the whole certification of carbon farming, we have to ensure that we have the incentives to continue the practices to ensure the longer permanency of the stored carbon. So as I don't see any questions in the chats, if anyone has a question, you can raise your hands. Okay, I see here a question from Ijani. You want to speak it out, or?
Yeah, sure. It's a bit noisy in the background. Hi, I'm Shani. My question, thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. Really nice to see some work on permanence again. Yeah, so what are your thoughts on how we deal with the liability of what's being claimed as permanent storage?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on that question, but I think it's probably very difficult to ensure the permanence, because it would mean that you need to have this monitoring for a very long time, and as soon as you stop this monitoring, you cannot really ensure this anymore. Especially with then events like climate change or extreme events that would maybe change in the future and start to release some of the carbon. So I think there would be maybe several options. I think having initially some discounts that are calculated based on those radiative forcing calculation could help to not oversell too many credits. And also the CRCF now is also taking this approach of a temporary credit that you have offset your emission only for a certain period of time and you need to renew by another project. So kind of a stacking approach. So I think this needs to be probably further developed on how to deal with this liability of permanence. I think it's a very complex topic when it comes to put it into practice.
Super, thank you.
I see you had a follow-up question. You can go ahead.
If I'm not taking time from other people's
questions. Come in, there's time for others.
I guess in the language I've been reading through in the regulation, I'm becoming a little bit concerned about this split between permanent and non-permanent. And from my reading of it, it appears, it appears to be a misusage of the word and a redirection. I get very concerned about liability in the long term. And I do wonder if we could use this kind of pathway of using permanence in its original definitions back from the 90s to find a way to unify these kind of credits through time so that everybody has a level playing field. And do you see a way we could do that? Or is that something you would be interested to work on?
So what would be the definition of, like the initial definition of permanence that you're referring to?
Sorry, I missed half of what you said.
Sorry. So what would be the initial definition of permanence that you're referring to then?
Yeah, from my memory, the original definitions were around, it is essentially a way to reflect the social value of time compared to our decisions now. And there was some work that equated permanence with discount as well, and discount theory. But yeah, I think there needs to be more work in that direction, a way to bring it together.
Yeah, I think it really depends on
yes.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the point of view, because indeed, I think from a more like physical or earth system science point of view, permanence would need to be like more than 1,000 years or even more than this if you want to really properly offset some fossil fuel emissions, which, it's quite difficult, I guess, to achieve in that case. But then, as you said, there could be maybe further development on how to, or which value to give to those short-term also sequestration, also acknowledging maybe that they are not necessarily permanent, but work on giving value to them, as you said, for the social cost of carbon or things like this. So I think, this would be very interesting developments make, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know if it answered. Yeah.
No, just more, I wanted to know if it's interesting to model it out a bit.
Definitely.
Very interesting pieces of work to explore this more. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think that we had at the Carbon Farming Summit in Dublin also some nice discussions on this topic. And I think this relates also a bit to the question of Camille. You go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Camille Ranier, working for the Belgian Federal Public Service Environment Climate Change Unit. I was the pilot for the CRCF regulation, and thank you for the very interesting presentation. I would like to come back on your conclusion regarding offsetting purpose for non-permanent unit. If we cannot offset, fossil emission with a CRCF unit, the non-permanent one. What kind of end use do you envisage for those kind of unit?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So I think I'm maybe not an expert on this, but I mean, already what I see is that in many cases, this might not lead to sequestration, but more reduction of emission, because also some soils are already losing carbon. So this would, in the first step, not be like sequestering, but reducing emission, which then you don't necessarily have this issue of the permanence, because then it leads to avoided emission. So all this I see as a good potential already for the units. And then when it comes to sequestration, yeah, I think there is value in incentivize this, that's for sure. I think it's a bit complicated to maybe directly offset emissions, but I think something that was discussed in this at this carbon farming summit as well is, first of all, something within the value chain, maybe that you try to compensate within your value chain already and use this for this. And something I could see as well would be maybe to offset some methane emission that are more short-lived, and so maybe having a condition that this could be used only for some type of emissions, such as methane. So yes, but this would need to be further developed for sure.
Yeah, thank
That
you
would
for
be my
your
point.
response.
But, yeah, this is also personal view, I guess.
Yeah, sure. And also, thank you for the discussion on non-permanent and liability mechanism. I just would like to invite the other people into this discussion to have a look at what the SBM of the Article 6.4 is developing now, because they are working a lot on this issue of non-permanence for forestry projects. So
Thank you very much.
can
Yes.
give some inspiration. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Jens, you wanted to add?
Yeah, maybe just one small addition to what Flora was responding to Camille, what we discussed also on the Carbon Farming Summit regarding what can we compensate with non-permanent biogenic things, and this could be biogenic sources. So one thing would be, as Flora said, to look within the value chain. Another thing would be, because of course these non-permanent things have a smaller value than the permanent ones, and we cannot guarantee permanence. We can think about only to use them for biogenic emissions within the agricultural and land use sector. This is just one point that we discussed in the Dublin meeting.
Okay. I see it's now 11:30, so our end time of this webinar. If there's not a very urgent last question, then I propose that we finalize this webinar. I would like to thank all the speakers and all the people who attended, and then well, I don't know if Leandro wants to say a last word, and thanks at least for him to hosting this webinar.
Thank you, Jan-Peter. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, just to remind you that this webinar will be uploaded, the video, to our website soon. Also, our next webinars, we plan to host at least around 3 webinars per year. So our next webinar will be in June. We will share the information soon, and so please keep updated if you're interested with what we are doing at the MARVIC project through our website, LinkedIn account, and other channels. So thank you very much for joining us. Until next time. Bye-bye.